Hello and welcome to the advanced section of multi and hybrid cloud architecture. And Anthos is the Google offering in this space. We will look at the introduction, the technical overview of Anthos, and what's a service mesh, and what's the multi-cluster ingress. And then we will look at some of the Anthos use cases. My intention for this is this is not required for cloud certification exam, but it's more about as an architect for you to know what's upcoming and sort of how the dynamics are changing for application development. So let's get started. Introduction, and I'm going to read it out loud. Anthos is a managed application platform for enterprises that want faster modernization and greater consistency in a hybrid and multi-cloud world. Now, I'll go through some of these keywords, but the reason it says that it's for modernization of hybrid and multi-cloud world, because typically, based on the legacy systems that we had, systems have always struggled because of different runtimes, different execution requirement, different platforms supporting different application, and it was really difficult to pull all of that together. Some of the components used to run in a monolithic way, some of the components which were product specific, so it has the products IP in terms of libraries and the way they execute. So it was very sparse sort of execution environment. What Kubernetes did, as Kubernetes has tried to simplify it and unify the execution environment. So if you have an execution engine which can unify the execution process across different types of application, you can start looking at application modernization, infrastructure modernization, or modernizing your entire application development lifecycle. So Anthos is an effort, or it's sort of an industry leading effort from Google to try to build that layer, unified layer across all the cloud platforms and on-premise world, to sort of have the one way of deploying an application. So if we look at this managed, it's consumption or subscription based, patched via automation, application platform which is based on Kubernetes, Istio, Knative, and Tekton. It's for enterprises, so built for large companies who have a very complex need. They run different kind of workloads based on different product lifecycle that want faster modernization. Modernization is tools to perform no-touch migration and automation, and greater consistency. Consistency is very synonymous with repetitive. So anything that is being deployed that can be defined as a declarative policies to enforce certain standard and also secure a standard everywhere, no matter where you deploy the application. And then in a hybrid and multi-cloud world, so you can run your application on premises, in GCP, or any other public cloud. So depending upon what stage of cloud adoption you are, depending upon your regulatory and compliance requirements, depending upon whether you use cloud for proof of concept and you want to deploy it back into your on-premises, to cater to all of these kind of execution environment requirements. So given that, to make any one of these things possible, there are certain requirements. So there has to be a unified execution layer. There has to be a way to find out where the services are running, how it needs to be routed to that specific service, and then the whole security management around it. And that's what pretty much Anthos provides. At the core of it, it's derived from GKE. So Kubernetes cluster, because that Kubernetes can run on any of the environments. Then it has Anthos service mesh, which tries to identify by proxies where the request needs to go. And then you have a management, which takes care of all of the security part of it, configuration part of it. It has an inbuilt logging and monitoring for operation side. And then you have a serverless way to execute your application. And that's pretty much, creates the core components of Anthos. Now let's look at the technical architecture of Anthos. So it's a very famous diagram from Google where they try to list on each and every component as part of the stack that is required for Anthos. So Anthos is a modern application management platform that provides a consistent development and operations experience. Now that's very important. A consistent development and operations experience for cloud and on-premises environments. So this is the diagram. Now let's look at it from the top. An application developer needs to build things. So he will come through the application development, and it has support for most of the IDEs that are available. Cloud Code is the serverless IDE available from Google Cloud. IntelliJ IDE and other IDs, where you can use the SDKs. Now let's jump to the bottom. Now, to make this possible for a developer to have a unified way of deploying any types of application, first thing first, it needs to run anywhere. So Google Cloud, on-premises, AWS, or any of the attached clusters. So what's important is that these offerings bundle upstream Kubernetes releases and provide management capabilities for creating, scaling, and upgrading conformant Kubernetes cluster. So any application which is conformant of Kubernetes cluster, that can be part of it. So above this, the first layer you will see is the Anthos cluster. Anthos cluster is a unified way to work with Kubernetes clusters. So you can have 1, 2, or Kubernetes cluster of different flavors, just open source, or the one installed on AWS, the one installed on Azure, or the GCP one, or you can have just any other attached cluster, or some other like Hadoop cluster, which is also moving towards Kubernetes cluster. So all of this, what you need is a unified way to work with all of these different kind of clusters, and that's what Anthos cluster is. You have consistent, unified, and secure infrastructure, cluster, and container management, whether you are using Anthos or on Google Cloud or somewhere else. So once you have a unified way to manage all of the clusters, what you need to look at it, the next step is how do you determine the ingress? And we have looked at ingress during Kubernetes as well. So Multicluster ingress is a cloud-hosted multi-cluster ingress controller for Anthos GKE clusters. It's a Google-hosted service that supports deploying shared load balancing resources across clusters and across region. What that means is you have the cluster, you can manage all of the different kinds of Kubernetes cluster, and then you have an ingress process or ingress controller which can load balance the request across all of the clusters. And then once you have the ingress defined, you need to do the service management, because the service management will tell exactly where it needs to go. So Anthos Service Mesh is a suite of tools that help you monitor and manage a reliable service mesh on premises or on Google Cloud. And we'll look at service mesh in detail. Then once you have this, another stack that is required is the policy enforcement, where it's anything to do with data, anything to do with security, and all of that stuff. So that's where Anthos has Anthos config management, which is a key component of Anthos. With Anthos config management, you can create a common configuration across all your infrastructure, including custom policies, and apply it both on premises and in the cloud. Anthos config management evaluates changes and rolls them out to all Kubernetes clusters so that your desired state is always reflected. Now, at this point, you have taken care of complete management of all of the clusters. Then there are UI capabilities available, and of course, it goes with all of the CLI and SDK components. But as part of the Anthos UI sort of layer, there are two main capabilities: manage and observe. Manage is about managing all of the cluster that it is responsible for across all variants and across on-premises and cloud. And then observe, so monitoring and logging, because that's one of the big USP of having Anthos, because you can centralize the operation of all your clusters. So that's primarily what Anthos UI, KRM APIs, and Anthos CLI provide you. They provide you a unified user interface. So the Anthos dashboards in the Google Cloud Console provides a secure, unified user interface to view and manage applications, including an out-of-the-box structured view of all the Anthos resources. Environ, which you see here, it's a domain that groups clusters and infrastructures and manages resources and keeps a consistent policy across them. So it's just an arbitrary or logical grouping of clusters, depending upon whether these clusters are for internal, external, for different business units, different domains, that sort of thing. And then you have the consolidated logging and monitoring. Anthos includes cloud logging and cloud monitoring for system components, and Kubernetes engine monitoring is enabled by default. Now, when you come to this part, the product is ready in terms of Anthos, but a product is as good as how easily extendable it is to the ecosystem. And that's where the whole application deployment layer comes into the picture. So Google Cloud Marketplace, migration for Anthos, Cloud Run for Anthos, CI/CD tooling, Cloud Build, and other ecosystem tooling like GitLab, Circle CI, etc. All of these are available on the marketplace, which you can integrate swiftly. So in terms of the marketplaces, the diverse range of solutions which you can find is the storage solutions, databases, continuous integration and delivery tools, monitoring solutions, security and compliance tool. And then, you have a deployment way, then it goes back to application development, building an application. So that sort of gives you a view how the Anthos stack is created and what each one of these individual layers, what sort of role they play. I mean, and if you compare it with the legacy world, all the layers here was not possible because every application had different way of execution lifecycle. Every application had a different way of deployment lifecycle. Every application has a different way of monitoring lifecycle. So where Anthos comes into picture is unifying that, and that makes your automation or modernization process much more smoother, because all you have to worry about is one umbrella suite of tools or products to manage different sorts of applications. Now let's look at what is basically a service mesh, because it's one of those catchy word in the industry right now, that you require a service mesh. But what is a service mesh? So a service mesh is an architecture that enables managed, observable, and secure communication across services. I would stop right here. What it is, there are different services, and services could be anything. A secure communication between these services and have a proper insight into, that's all is a service mesh, as is plain English. Now, if we factor it out, it's basically, it factors out all the common concerns of running a service, such as monitoring, networking, security with consistent, powerful tools, making it easier for service developers and operators to focus on creating and managing great applications for their users. Anthos Service Mesh is powered by Istio. It's a highly configurable and powerful open source service mesh platform. Um, so if I try to define it in a layman terms, is that if you have looked at a network topology, it is, or some kind of a circuit network, which is sort of like a really spaghetti model, wires going from here to there, there and there to that's the problem Istio solves, or a service mesh solves. It knows where what needs to go, you know so that's where it solves that. Sort of think of it as a traffic controller, or like a traffic man. So if you look at this to architecturally, a service mesh consists of one or more control planes and a data plane. So if you look at here, this is the open source Istio architecture. Google service mesh is a direct adoption of this Istio. So it has a control plane and then it has a data plane. The service mesh monitors all traffic through a proxy. So for any of the ingress traffic, you look at the proxy and you determine whether it needs to go to service A or whether it needs to go to service B, or accordingly the egress traffic goes. What the control plane does is, through its library of tools, it discovers configuration. It does the discovery of all the services. It does the configuration across all the services, and it takes care of the certificates. So on Kubernetes, the proxy is deployed by a sidecar pattern to the microservices in the mesh. But on virtual machines, it's installed on the VM. And this pattern decouples application or business logic from network functions and enables developers to focus on the feature that the business needs. So like I was giving an example of a circuit network. So in a circuit network, where the route information used to be configured on the node itself. So what service mesh is basically decouples that process, and creates a sort of a virtual service based on proxies. Why you should use Istio? Istio makes it easy to create a network of deployed services. Just remember this: network of deployed services with load balancing, service to service authentication, monitoring, and more, with few or no code changes in service code. So your application code does not change, nothing to do with it. Your networking doesn't change. It goes that it's a layer on top which helps you create a network of deployable services with load balancing. How to use Istio? You add Istio support to services by deploying a special sidecar proxy throughout your environment that intercepts all network communication between microservices. So based on the microservices architecture, if an application is broken into different apps, so for a retail, let's say example, payment, card creation, and sort of like a recommendation, blah blah blah, and all of that, there is a proxy attached to each one of this, and when the request comes based on that proxy, it is routed to the service. It does an automatic load balancing for HTTP, gRPC, WebSockets, and TCP traffic, as a fine-grained control of traffic behavior with rich routing rules, retries, failovers, and fault injection. A pluggable policy layer and configuration API supports access control, rate limits, and quotas. Automatic metrics, logs, and traces for all traffic within a cluster, including cluster ingress and egress. Secure service-to-service communication in a cluster with strong identity-based authentication and authorization. So think of it exactly, it's a layer between applications where they need to run. So there are typically two layers between application and this, is that how that application gets navigates through the network, in terms of where it needs to go. That's the whole network part of it. And then after the network has decided where it needs to go, the validation in terms of exactly which service it needs to go, that's where service mesh comes into picture. Now let's look at multi-cluster ingress, which is same as the ingress for Kubernetes, but giving the scope of multi-cluster. So multi-cluster ingress is a cloud-hosted multi-cluster ingress controller for Anthos GKE clusters. It's a Google-hosted service that supports deploying shared load balancing resources across clusters and across regions. Multi-cluster networking. Many factors drive multi-cluster topologies, including close user proximity for apps, cluster and regional high availability, security and organizational separation, cluster migration, and data locality. So in this case, there's a user coming from San Francisco, there's a user coming from Berlin, you have a cluster running in US West 1, Europe West 1, and the traffic will be mostly redirected to localized Kubernetes cluster. If the localized Kubernetes cluster is not available, then it will be routed to the distant one. Multi-cluster ingress is designed to meet the load balancing needs of multi-cluster, multi-regional environments. It's the controller for the external HTTPS load balancer to provide ingress for traffic coming from the internet across one or more customers. Similarly, you could have another cluster which is sort of, in between these West 1 region and the Europe region. Now again, if the US West 1 is not available, it will try to go to the closest one from the point of presence. Multi-cluster ingress, multi-cluster support satisfies many use cases, including a single consistent virtual IP for an app, independent of where the app is deployed globally, which is really great. It doesn't matter, and especially for a lot of internet-based companies, it plays a very important part, that you need to configure your services only based on one IP, and depending upon user's location, depending upon what's the closest Google point of presence, it will route to the nearest Kubernetes cluster. So all of that intelligence is built in. Multi-regional, multi-cluster availability through health checking and traffic failover. Proximity-based routing through public Anycast VIP for a low client latency. Transparent cluster migration for upgrades or cluster rebuilds. And then with the networking comes the ingress architecture. So multi-cluster ingress architecture, it uses a centralized Kubernetes API server to deploy ingress across multiple clusters. This centralized API server is called the config cluster. So in this case, there are three: GKE US, EU, and Asia. Config cluster is deployed on GKE US, it could be deployed on any one of these. The config cluster uses two custom resource types: multi-cluster ingress and multi-cluster service. By deploying these resources on the config cluster, the Anthos ingress controller deploys load balancers across multiple clusters. So the setup of this config cluster, it's basically takes care of deploying the load balancer. So depending upon where the client is coming from, it will go through this the localized or the most local load balancer. The following concepts and components that make up it is the Anthos ingress controller. This is a globally distributed control plane that runs as a service outside of your cluster. This allows the lifecycle and operations of the controller to be independent of GKE clusters. Config cluster, which we just looked at it's a chosen CKE cluster running on Google Cloud, where the multi-cluster ingress and multi-cluster service resources are deployed. Environ is a domain that groups clusters and infrastructure, manages resources, and keeps a consistent policy across all of them. and the member cluster, which is the rest of the other clusters, which are the member clusters. So I hope at least you know it gives you knowledge of to make a multi-cluster architecture. How important is the networking part of it, how important is the ingress part of it, and how important is the service mesh part of it. And then you have your sort of standard uh, Anthos UI and everything to have a complete view into everything. So think of a product which is sort of a stacked abstraction, and which supports multiple set of tools, and it has a unified sort of uh, governance way, utilizing the broad Google networking products. With this, let's look at what are the benefits and use cases of Anthos. So like we said, Anthos is a managed application platform that extends Google Cloud services and engineering practices to other environments so that you can modernize apps faster and establish operational consistency across them. All about the unification. Benefits: manage application anywhere. It gives a consistent platform for all applications deployments, both legacy as well as cloud native, while offering a service centric view of all the environments. Deliver software faster, build enterprise grade containerized applications faster with managed Kubernetes on cloud and on premise environments, create a fast, scalable software delivery pipeline with cloud native tooling and guidance, protect applications and software supply chain, leverage a programmatic, outcome focused approach to managing policies for apps across environments, and enable greater awareness and control with a unified view of services, health, and performance. In terms of use cases, migrating and modernizing, you will hear about it all the time. Application modernization, infrastructure modernization. This is something, trying to unify all of the applications under one umbrella and have a faster delivery methodology, and that's where Anthos is making a major push. So if you have a unified execution environment, you can modernize any application, and that's pretty much the pretext of you know um, uh, adoption rate of Anthos. Replatforming: if you already used Kubernetes GKE today but have on-prem requirements, existing container platform, but are considering replatforming, generally concerned about cost and flexibility, Anthos is an option. So a lot of times it's been a challenge that you have open source platform with you're running in on premises, and if you need to port it to the cloud or to another environment, that's always a challenge. But that's where Anthos provides a very very inexpensive way to sort of re-platform your application to cloud. Vertical solutions: retail telco customers looking to power B2B, B2C commerce services. This is It's a very important use case for a lot of retail companies, or anywhere it's based on customers, because of the way the services need to be deployed, the way microservices architecture actually fits those business use cases. Kubernetes and Anthos is a really good option. Leveraging data and services on prem. So desire consistency service management across environments, AI ML services, API management, data governance. Most often, any application running on cloud um, needs to connect to on-premises for either stateful requirements or accessing large amounts of data, or and especially for AI and ML, there are a lot of use cases where they need to reference a lot of different sets of data. And this is where Anthos provides a unified ways, because from single pane of glass you can access data across different environments. Adopting GitOps. So in the CI/CD worlds, GitOps, which is the Git-based operations, GitOps is really gaining a lot of momentum, and also GitHub Actions. Microsoft investing a lot on GitHub Actions. That's becoming a predominantly major force towards automation, or towards continuous delivery, uh, continuous integration, and continuous delivery. So adopting GitOps becomes easier because all of the deployments are declarative, and it's based on YAML files. They sit on GitHub, so it's really easy to propagate all of the changes using your Git repository into Kubernetes based deployments, providing a zero-touch services platform with better governance. Stamp out fully managed tenant environment with config management, multi-tenancy, access, cost, and operational control. So management of the infrastructure, this always been a selling point of any cloud platform. But if you go one step further, is that irrespective of where your application runs, whether it runs on cloud or anywhere, if you take out the whole management overhead, that's a big win. So it's a really important point. Offering a consistent UX for SaaS enabled solutions. So because it supports a lot of tools from marketplace, and at the same time it supports so a lot of different types of applications which are run, and Anthos provides a unified consistent UX. So evolve cloud hosted plus on-prem solutions, looking for a common SaaS platform and unified UX to accelerate and modernize customer deployment. So to be able to see if you deployed an application, did it deploy correctly on-premise, did it deploy correctly on AWS, and in future on Azure, and then did it deploy on any other cluster. To be able to see all of that through one single UI, it's just amazing. So I hope this gave you some idea about what's multi and sort of hybrid cloud architecture space, and where Anthos comes into picture. Now watch out for this space, because Anthos, since it was released about a year ago, it was announced by Google CEO Sundar Pichai, and it has gained a lot of momentum. There's a lot of work going on. There's a lot of nitty-gritties that's being resolved. Google also announced sort of a sandbox for Anthos, which you can try. But this space is bound to grow, because more and more traditional applications start running their pipelines on Kubernetes. There's a lot of movement going towards Spark running on Kubernetes, the Hadoop cluster moving away from Yarn and actually adopting Kubernetes. Similarly, the more and more industry matures towards that, a platform like this will be really handy for a lot of organizations, because we deal with a lot of different kind of applications, and we get lost into managing all of that. So watch out for this space. I hope this was useful. Thank you.